But yeah, so this is going to be Neuroscience and Law. We have Dr. Malavanti as our guest speaker. If you haven't already, you can go ahead and get your attendance in to the QR code. So I just wanted to kind of introduce the topic, and Dr. Malavanti starting with what is Neuroscience and Law course. I'm currently in it, and I know when I signed up for it, I had no idea what it was or what could be correlated with these two fields. But it's actually really interesting when you think of these questions. What are adolescents, psychopaths, and white collar fraud artists thinking in crime or in the court system? Why is emotional trauma from victims and abuse last long? Why eyewitness testimony memory is poor, and use of biases in courts with jurors or judges and everything like that. It's actually an interesting concept. So I'm going to introduce Dr. Malavanti. If you don't know, she is a senior lecturer and neuroscience advisor here at Baylor. If you guys have taken cognition, you probably already know who she is. And now she's teaching neuroscience and law. And she also is broad areas of research, such as psychology, but if there are any questions before we start? Okay.
All right, hi everyone. I'm going to use the mic because I am losing my voice. I'm so sorry about that, but I'm so excited to be here. Let me transition over to my presentation. So, thank you, Megan, for your introduction. I'm really excited to be here. I am a 3-time Baylor alumna, and I was in this club as a student as well. And so it's very, it's so nice to be invited to these things because I think it's really important for you to know your professors. And it's important for you to realize also that we're multifaceted. So we can stand in front of a class, but we also, are participating in advising stuff or faculty and residents or other things, or you might see us at our Baylor basketball game or something like that, and so we are actual humans. And so I'm really excited to get to know you and have you get to know me as we kind of delve into some of my research and some of my broader areas of research and kind of what I'm bringing to bear in this department in this new class. So contact information is there. My office is there too. I'm also available via email if you have questions about the neuroscience major, or I was also a psychology advisor when I was at Carson University in my last position. So broadly, if you have questions about psych, I'm also happy to answer those questions as well. Okay, so as Megan mentioned, I am a cognitive psychologist, really interested in applications of cognition to the legal setting, but also to education. And so my research, though, I've been looking at this application to legal work. I've done this in 2 ways, where we look at memory in the law and decision-making in the law. So looking at eyewitness memory and jury decision-making in particular. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this because I really want to answer all of your questions here, but I have a bunch of background information, so I do just want to present it in case you're interested in either talking about, what is forensic psych and how is this different from legal psych, because they're so different, or maybe you want to take a class or do a forensics minor or something like that. So I just want to give you a brief overview. So first, when I'm speaking about an eyewitness memory, I'm talking about an account of some kind of crime. It could be a civil litigation, it could be criminal, but in the criminal settings, we really think that a witness must be paying attention to very important stimuli. But our perceptual systems and our memories are not built for the type of precision that we would like there to be in courts. So in a perfect world, we would have absolute perfect memories so that if you witnessed a crime, you would get no details wrong. Nobody would ever be wrongfully convicted. However, we do not live in this perfect world. And so because of that, we sometimes have issues that arise. So in my area of study, then I have looked at some, policies surrounding eyewitness memory, specifically how police officers ask questions and how they administer lineups to eyewitnesses. So there's some problems here with eyewitness memory. You might have heard about change blindness. Like a lot of people, it takes them a second to tell the difference, but once you get it, it's really obvious. Memory malleability, which means it's changeable over time. And weapon focus effect, where it's like if your personhood is threatened by violence, you're probably going to be really paying attention to what is about to cause you violence, the knife, the gun, etc. You might not pay as close attention to the person's face. So in this imperfect world, in my past work with the Innocence Project, and the Innocence Project really looks specifically at evidentiary procedures to overturn wrongfully convicted individuals. And there have been just a whole lot of people who have really remained steadfast in their in this notion and their word that they did not commit the crime. And eventually we kind of uncover through really hard ways, lots of like cutting tape and things like that. But basically it's just been really hard. But we have gotten 250 wrongful convictions overturned, and those were strictly due to eyewitness evidence, for 75% of them. So what does this actually tell us about human memory and the mind and therefore the ability? Is that we just have memories that don't work like a video camera. In my cognition class, we talk a lot about the fact that that's actually okay. If you have experienced trauma, you're not going to want to have like picture perfect recollection of that trauma on a day-to-day life. So our memory is actually very helpful and efficient. And part of that though means that we're not going to have a perfect witness to a crime. Okay? So it's impacted by a lot of factors, and we just have to recognize that, and then we need to have policies in place to kind of check that. So let's get something straight. Before we really get into neuroscience and my previous research, is that there is a difference between forensic psychology and legal psychology, where forensic psychology is a much more applied setting than legal psychology. So a lot of you probably watch actually, do you guys still watch Law and Order? Yes, you? Okay. Yeah, crime scene investigations, the CSI. I'm trying to think of other ones as well. But we see these shows and we're thinking like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm going to be a forensic psychologist. I'm going to work for the FBI. Okay, and that's great. And I love that. And got friends, working in there, they love their jobs. But that is a much more applied degree than the one that I have. So I am a scientist. I'm a scientific researcher. I'm an experimentalist. So I do research in a controlled setting so that I can answer big questions. Somebody that is in forensic psych might work a little differently. They're probably not going to be hanging out in a lab. They're probably going to be like working alongside jurors and attorneys and things like that, so that we can kind of see, well, how do we best help foster children as they navigate trauma, right? So that'd be a clinical psychologist, an applied degree that is in the forensic setting. So that's very different from the work that I do. So I'm a legal psychologist, I'm not a forensic psychologist. And those of you who have taken forensic psych know, right, how much of an applied class that is. And you talk about things like, oh yeah, let's talk about trauma and trauma in the courts and those things. So clinical psychologists are typically going to be that gateway into forensic psych, whereas legal psych, you can be a social psychologist, you can be a cognitive psychologist, you can be a clinical psychologist, although we don't have many, but it is much more than like a basic science and it's been applied. However, all of these do have this propensity to be able to hold a doctor. And then a note about profiling here. So many people, right, again, say like, I'm going to be a profiler. And, we just have to realize that FBI agents are not mental health professionals. They are law enforcement. And that's the type of training and background you would have to be able to be in a position such like that. So they're going to be kind of given a lot of, as I said, experience and background on criminal investigations, and then as well as psychological expertise and knowledge. So really, you know, if you want to be a profiler, you should really be very interested in law enforcement, because that is broadly the agency you'll be working on. Okay. Forensic psychologists can also assess, treat, and evaluate individuals within this forensic setting and are very applied. And so, yes, you know, they work in the courts, but they also can work in prisons, they can work in rehabs, law firms, private practice. You know, one of my dearest friends spent, you know, her whole career really working with foster children, you know, and navigating that. So like, you know, when a foster child is up for adoption, and we are trying to assess really important things like services to be rendered that will carry on over time. It's going to be a very intense evaluation, assessment, and you know, carryover process. Okay. And then the last thing I'll say about this before just go ahead and moving on is that insanity, kind of this quote unquote insanity, is a legal term. This is not a psychological term, but it is something that kind of draws us to this. And then we also have to realize that because it's not grounded in psychological phenomena, it's really hard for these scientists to then address this. So in our neuroscience and the law class, we have been having lots of conversations about, well, what does it mean if you have a brain tumor? And you know, it might not be ethical for us to force you to remove this tumor, even though you murdered your wife. Like, okay, but does this person qualify then for not guilty by reason of quote unquote insanity? Okay, so these are like these big questions that the legal system is grappling with, and that neuroscience will help inform over time, especially as our methods of assessment become more sophisticated, more fine-tuned, more reliable, and more. All right, so this is a legal term, it's not a psychological term, which means that they don't have scientific backing, and that's why we're going to have a whole lot of ethical questions that arise from this. Within the criminal justice system, we do see a whole lot of psychological disorders that are unfortunately not being addressed over time. So, you know, if you are interested in forensic or legal psychology, well, there's a big need there. We've got a lot of people, these individuals are people who have some real issues here. And we also know that when these individuals are released, their recidivism rate is higher than others who don't have some of these psychological issues. So that's just the propensity to reoffend. So we really think we probably need to address this in a more systemic way. So we can add layers of support to individuals who have served their time to society and are now hopefully going to play a good role in society at large. So let's just go ahead and then go to my stuff, and then we'll bring in the neuroscience here. So legal psychology, again, this is where I work. This is the application of research and experimentalism into the legal area. Again, cognitive, social, developmental, clinical, right? This is where we work. This is what we do. We are asking big questions by using science as the framework and using the basics of experimentation. So this is, again, the scientific study into the effect of law on its people. Within juror decision-making, we are asking questions like, what does it mean for individuals to have biases, and then also, they're also clear to serve as a juror. All of us have biases because we all have experiences that have changed our lives. So there are some times where we don't even acknowledge or understand that we have a bias. So in our neuroscience and law class recently, we talked about, well, what does it mean like to be a mother and then to also be a judge and then have to render, you know, an indictment on sexual assault, right? That might change the way that you lay down decisions and that's part of your identity, and yet that is too one type of bias. So in some of the work that I have done in the lab, we have seen that jurors, if they see a video of a crime, and this is really interesting because that video actually changes overall decisions. So if they see the video of the crime, they are actually less likely to convict. And this is interesting because they have all the information that they had at the time they made their initial decision. So when I say that I'm an experimentalist, it means that I designed studies to ask these questions. So they first received a whole bunch of information, everything that they would receive to make a decision or render a decision. And then we say like, oh, wait, we found new evidence, watch this video. And then they get to see it and they make an updated decision. And we see that when they watch this video, it's actually exculpatory. They are less likely. Now, you would think that because it's exculpatory, which means that it's not the same person that's on trial in the video, that this would be all the way down. But the fact of the matter is that they have been now biased because they read all of this other information that pointed to this person in the crime, and they think it's that person. This is further exacerbated by something called cognitive load. You might be under high cognitive load. We have a lot of stuff going on in your body. Like maybe you are trying to do more than one thing at once, or you just have complicated things that you're thinking about. Individuals who are under cognitive load are unable to update their knowledge as effectively as those who are not under the same cognitive load. This research has been published, and we have seen that as we talk to jurors about what information and how it needs to kind of be thought of before they render a verdict, we also need to let them know, like, okay, like clear your mind. Let's not think about the work that you're missing, or the fact that you're only getting paid $8 an hour right now, and that can be super stressful for this time. Like all the things. Emotional things can also influence cognitive load as well. Okay. We have to realize that jurors are doing the society so much good. It is an amazing thing to be a part of a jury because you are part of the criminal justice system at that time. We just have to also realize that it is hard. It is hard to do that and to pay that service, right, to your jurisdiction. And that we come with some existing experiences, like the fact that we don't understand how memory works. So if you're a juror on a case that has an eyewitness to the crime, we just got to realize that even a simple word that the eyewitness heard can affect the way that they overall will make estimations of speed later on. We have got a division in APA, so we're APA Division 41 or APLS. Okay? And this is the American Psychology Law Society. That is where kind of all the things happen, annual conference, a journal. And so all of this work is published there. And they welcome student members. Because of my previous experience in legal psych, but also my general interest in neuroscience, we developed a course in neuroscience and the law. And so that's what Megan was talking about earlier. Okay. This class will be a 3,000 level class of the future. Right now it's being taught as a special topics, 4.6, but will be part of an option or elective for the neuroscience major. So it'll be 3381, which is like the sister course, kind of to forensic psych, which is 3380. So in this class, we spent a whole lot of time asking big questions. And those questions are surrounding these particular topics. Right? So what do we know about brain development that would help inform us about the way that adolescents function And I say that speaking to a room of people who just like graduated adolescence. But you know, just that the decision making because of frontal lobe development is actually pretty poor in teenagers and young adults. And because of that, you know, we have to realize that 18 is arbitrary for the law. So much so that sometimes some jurisdictions say that we should try a 15-year-old as an adult. But we also know that like adult males don't have fully developed prefrontal cortices until their mid-20s. They develop much slower, sorry to say guys, than females. The brain is different, but it doesn't mean that we can okay adolescent male misbehavior, right? So if an adolescent, a teenager is driving really quickly down the highway, speeding, texting, causes a massive car accident, they shouldn't get off any lighter of a sentence for the harm that they have caused than if in comparison to a female, just because the female's brain was more developed. But at the same time, we do need to recognize, right, that this plays a role in risky behavior and risky decision making. So there's a lot that neuroscience can do to inform this area. What about psychopathy? What does it mean to have psychiatric illnesses? What does it mean to have personality disorders? What does it mean to have an identity that can interact with how you make decisions in your world? And particularly, what about crime? Cognitive enhancement. We, you know, we're talking about Neuralink recently, so we're talking about Elon Musk's, you know, in research avenue on like, well, what's it going to be like when we have like this implantation of a chip that can do so much, you know? And we talked about kind of this dream about it, and like what is the link system going to do about it? We've already talked about like the difference between emotional pain and physical pain, and the fact that physical pain is thought of as being much more serious than emotional pain in the eyes of the court. But that can also lead to stigmatization of emotional pain, right? And so it doesn't necessarily mean that just because something causes emotional pain, that you should be any less, you know, cause any less harm. You cause just as much emotional pain. And maybe we need to recognize that a little bit better. And then we've also, you know, had greater conversations about some of these things, and some these are to be announced. But you know, it's a really great course, it's a discussion-based course. I'm excited that we're having these conversations. I'm excited for the work that we're doing in neuroscience and the law. It is pretty still new. So neuroscience in itself is very new science, but it is something that gets sophisticated and more fine-tuned every day as we do more of this research. So I'm going to end up here right around 4:30 just to give us time. Do you have any questions? Do you have any ideas? You know, because this is a class that is very student-led, but we also, you know, we're kind of molding it as we go. But, you know, I want to be able to ask any questions or answer any questions that you have. And that's my dog, Ruby. He just recently passed away, but he was the best dog. All right, question. Thoughts? Yes.
Actually, can you explain the jury decision making from after they watch the video? Is it because it goes against like their initial bias, or how does that work?
Yeah, so we actually, what we have posited is that once you form a decision of guilt or not, that you anchor into that. And then it's harder to make a shift. So you'll recognize that like attorneys, they often watch what are the jurors doing by body language or like facial expressions and things like that, so that they can make an assessment of like, okay, well, how do I need to present this next evidence to sway them in my direction? Because the earlier that you do that and you lay a foundation for them to kind of feel on your side, right, the more likely it is that then they'll retain that vote, right? Great question. Yes.
So, you know how in legal settings they have ending remarks kind of wrapping up their case? Because of this, is that like really, does it do anything, like the ending remarks, other than just summarize?
I mean, so we love a good story. That's just like human nature. We like to put a bow on the end of things, and so that helps serve as that way. So that, the way that you form that narrative is really important if you were to be an attorney. And it is something that we don't think like plays a huge impact here, except for as it just ties a bow and just says like, yep, totally guilty, or they didn't convince me.
So in this demonstration, is the video, like, what is the video again? The video showing the crime?
The video is showing the crime, and they actually were able to see, like, for that in the initial evidence, they were able to see like the face and the physical description of the individual that is on trial. We actually used it from the Innocence Project. That's how we know this person is like, we knew all his evidence of it for him to be the criminal, and to end him in jail. But then we also had access to this exculpatory evidence that showed that someone else has committed the crime.
Of someone else?
Yes.
Okay.
And so it should have freed him immediately, but it took DNA evidence to actually do that.
What research has been done about like jury selection?
Oh, yeah.
So within that process, how does neuroscience kind of like play a role in that?
Yeah, so again, in our discussions, we've been trying to figure out like, okay, well, right now we don't use neuroscience in jury selection. And I don't actually know if we came to a conclusion in the class. It's very open-ended, you know? Obviously, somebody who has trouble making decisions, you probably wouldn't want to serve on a jury. So if somebody has like a prefrontal cortex that's damaged by tumors or aneurysm or trauma, there's a lot of different things that can affect that. Probably wouldn't want to be on a jury. That would probably manifest itself behaviorally. So you could assess it that way. But as of right now, there haven't been any ways that we have said like you need to have submit your brain scan in order to be on a jury. You know, who knows what that's gonna look like in the future, right? It's like dystopian, like, oh my gosh, what is it gonna be like in the future when it becomes way less expensive, when it becomes publicly accessible, when it becomes something that's like your driver's license, like you just show it, you know, instead of it being like a big deal. Oh, here's a picture of it, you know. One day it might be normal, you know, to be like, oh yeah, normal brain, I can serve on the jury, you know. But we are definitely not there yet. And so just to say, maybe in the future someday.
Do people have to take like mental assessments or questionnaires before serving on a jury?
Not necessarily. Yeah, but individuals can disclose, especially if the trial will touch on some of those things because it can bias them in that particular way. Yes.
So, how much conflict is there between the law and neuroscience? Because when you said that, the brain doesn't formally develop until about like 25 or so.
For males, yeah.
For male, okay, so if the law is thinking of, you know, dropping the limit down to 15 instead of 18, how much conflict is that if, you know, the law wants to do something, it goes against the scientific research in neuroscience?
Yeah, so that the 18 is arbitrary and the 18 is also state. You know, so there are some states where it's like 17 is an adult or 19 is an adult, you know, and so it's just, that's kind of arbitrary and is not dealt on science, as well as any jurisdiction can make that kind of whether the evidence means that you can pursue one type of oh my gosh, criteria, like, you know, if they meet the criteria versus another. So, you know, like when we are thinking of that particular example, it is usually going to be done because of extreme malice, and they think like extreme harm to the state if this individual were to not be gone for like the rest of their life. That is probably a really pessimistic view, but you have to realize that this is a very kind of, it's a response, and sometimes it's an emotional response, sometimes it's media response. You know, so there have been, you know, cases where the child murdered their parents, right? And so then you find out, oh, okay, what's actually going on? And so all of that, like, okay, well, does this person need help? Yeah, probably. There's like lots of trauma. Is this person that are served in the prison system? And, you know, that's up for that jurisdiction. And so as of right now, we don't have a federal mandate to like say it's 18 or that we can't go in either direction. And that is completely up to the person to decide.
So does that make it difficult for like defense attorneys and lawyers to kind of work with those neuroscientists and?
Yeah, I mean, so it's usually the defense attorneys that would hire a neuroscientist to say, well, let's look at this person's brain, so let's look at the effect of trauma, let's look at the effect of this tumor, let's look at what their prefrontal cortex is doing, let's look at, you know, psychopathy indexes, you know, all the things that would be hired by the defense attorney to kind of counteract the fact the state has said, no, we need to charge this person as an adult. So yeah, it does make it hard, but it's not outside the realm of possibility for that data to be introduced. Other questions? Well, this has been so lovely. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah.
You want to conclude your meeting?
Yeah, so for site club members, Ivy, who's president, asked me to tell y'all over my adult that the officer applications are due April 7th. If that's incorrect, that's right.
It's
Eighth? She texted me the 7th. And then Sarah announced the 2nd. I'm sorry, guys. I'll talk with our secretary and clarify that, and she'll resend an email with the link, but just make sure, I guess, be on the lookout for that. That's coming up, so.
Oh, and t-shirts, I have them if you have paid. So.
We don't really have any additional things to say, but you guys found it interesting. Want to have a lookout. It's been fun. We love getting into our heated debates.
Yep.
Sometimes.
We like it.
And then you get to present like your own kind of discussion on a topic you find interesting, and my topic certainly had some high debates. But
You can tell me your topic.
sure. Have any of you guys taken Dr. Swollen sleep?
You should definitely take it.
You should
That's
take
a good
it.
class.
But towards the end of the semester, he kind of mentions parasomnia, which is basically anything you do in your sleep that's weird. But sleepwalking, talking, a lot of disorders. And one of them that he lightly touches on is called sexsomnia, or sleep-related violence. And that is basically when you're sleeping, but you look like you're awake. It's kind of like sleepwalking, you're walking around. But these people with these disorders, they can sexually assault someone or kill someone. And there was one that got pretty popular in the media of a man killing his wife. And I think that there's like it's really intense and it's very tragic. But my article, one particular case everybody was getting heated on because there was a man who drove 23 kilometers or something like that to go and kill his mother-in-law or kill his father-in-law in attempt. Which is weird, right? It's weird you could drive, didn't get in an accident, nothing. And the difference between these two cases, my article was just compiling a bunch of cases, is that there are some murders or assaults they got, or violence. Murders or violence they got verdicts where the defendant got some sort of punishment. But the sexsomnia cases, so it's very controversial. One was consenting, one was unconscious, but they were the Stuff like that.
What side were you on?
Oh gosh. I don't know, I just found it weird. I found it weird that like the violence was getting like a verdict and people were going to jail for it, but not the sex on it. And I think it's mainly because of just I think that people can talk about murder way easier than sexual assault. And that's something society thinks, and just how that correlates with the severity of the crime. Alright, well, thank you guys for coming. If you guys didn't get the extended